Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. They say fear leaves no fingerprints, but they're wrong. I've seen what it does. I've seen it etched into people's faces, frozen wide like they saw the devil himself, eyes bulging, mouths torn open in screams that never made a sound. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm a cop. I've walked in on murders, accidents, suicides, but nothing like this. The town I transferred to 6 months ago, Ridgewater Creek. It's small, quiet, wrapped in trees and fog. One of those places where everyone waves and nothing bad ever happens. Until now. People are dying. There's no sign of struggle, no cause, just a look of pure horror on their faces. And every time I think I've found a lead, I find something worse, something older. If you're hearing this, don't come looking. Ridgewater Creek is already lost. I just haven't admitted it yet. But if you want to understand how we got here, I can show you a glimpse. Just listen. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching against the gravel as I moved toward the crime scene. Red and blue strobes pulsed through the dark, throwing erratic flashes across the trees and roadside. But my eyes were locked on the figure lying still in the dirt. The first thing that struck me was the smell, a sickly mix of damp soil and something metallic, almost like rusted iron or old blood. It was the kind of stench that clings to the back of your throat, refusing to let go. I adjusted my scarf as I ducked under the yellow tape fluttering in the wind. The man was in his late 30s, married, no kids, a local high school teacher named Gregory Tate. He lay on his back, arms stretched out as if he'd clawed at the ground in a final, desperate panic. But there were no wounds, no blood, no signs of violence. His body was untouched, intact, yet something about the scene felt deeply wrong. Then my flashlight caught his face, and I felt my stomach drop. His mouth hung unnaturally wide, stretched into a soundless scream frozen in time. His eyes bulged, staring at the void, but still radiated with raw, unrelenting terror. It was as if his last moments had been carved into his flesh, a permanent echo of whatever had seized him in those final horrifying seconds. A shiver crawled up my spine as my thoughts immediately snapped back to 2 other murders, both eerily similar, and both occurring within the last 2 weeks. I lowered my flashlight, sweeping it over the ground around the body. That's when I noticed it. A crudely etched circle surrounding him, as though drawn during his final moments. Near his feet, a string of letters was scrawled into the dirt, in a language I couldn't recognize. The arrangement felt disturbingly ritualistic, like he'd been pulled into some kind of dark ceremony that ended in death. What made it worse was the pattern. 2 others had already been found the same way, dead, intact, and frozen in terror. The next day back at my station, I immersed myself in the case files, leaning back in my chair as the details swirled through my mind. The first was Clara Evans, a store clerk found dead in her living room, slumped in a corner. No signs of forced entry. Her face was locked in pure terror. She'd drawn a circle around herself in lipstick and scrawled something unintelligible near her feet. A week earlier, she'd quit her job and cut off contact with friends, said she was stressed. Then came Jack Monroe, a local mechanic. Neighbors said he'd been hearing noises around his house and had started sleeping in his garage with the doors barricaded. That's where we found him, surrounded by scattered tools, face frozen in horror. No injuries, just fear. The third was Gregory Tate, a high school teacher, married, no enemies. According to his wife, he'd grown paranoid, refusing to leave the house after dark. Then one night, he just walked out. A mile into the woods, we found him lying in the dirt, intact, wide-eyed, mouth open like he'd seen something the human brain wasn't built to process. 3 people, 3 completely different lives, no clear connections except for one chilling detail, the way they died. Each one frozen in fear, as if something unimaginable had stared back at them in their final moments. But there was something else, something I couldn't ignore. At each scene, an object had been found beside the body, seemingly random but too specific to be coincidence. With Clara, it was a small, handheld mirror. With Jack, a miniature toy bus. And next to Gregory, a fountain pen, old, elegant, the kind you don't see much anymore. The really odd thing here, though, was that the objects looked like relics that belonged to another era, probably the late 70s or the early 80s, and it made me wonder if they had been left behind by the killer. Sergeant Holbrook, however, had a different take. He didn't mince words, calling it outright the work of the devil. A police veteran with decades of experience, Holbrook claimed to remember similar occurrences from his childhood. And each time we arrived at a new crime scene, I could see his face grow paler, as if the evidence before us confirmed his worst fears. The townspeople had their own theories, most of them pointing to something dark and old, especially the elders. Some of them remembered the killings from 50 years ago, when photos from the scene started leaking online. It didn't take long for the whole town to spiral into panic. Whispers turned to warnings. People stopped going out at night. I was halfway through a lukewarm coffee when Sergeant Holbrook stepped into my office, a file in his hand, the coroner's report. I already knew what it would say. Just like the others, no trauma, no wounds, no sign of struggle, nothing to fight, nothing to catch. All three had been in good health with no underlying medical conditions. The coroner's report mentioned cardiac arrest brought on by extreme stress, but the words rang hollow. It felt more like a convenient excuse than any real explanation. "Officer Harper," Holbrook's voice suddenly cut through my thoughts, his tone measured, almost hesitant. "The mayor wants to meet you at the town hall." A knot tightened in my stomach. Town hall meetings were rarely good news. With 3 unexplained deaths in less than 2 weeks, the townsfolk of Ridgewater Creek, a tight-knit community of just 1,000 people, were bound to have questions, and not the easy kind. News here moved faster than the wind, and the pressure to provide answers was mounting. Being the new cop in town, a city officer who had moved here just 6 months ago to take charge, had already made me a topic of gossip. Now, with these cases piling up, it felt like the tide of suspicion was beginning to shift toward me. Holbrook and I climbed into the cruiser, and as we drove through the quiet streets, I stared out the window, running through what I'd say in my head. When we arrived, the town hall was already packed with people. Parents clutched their children protectively, teenagers huddled together in nervous whispers, and the elderly exchanged worried glances. The weight of their fear hung heavy in the air, pressing against me like a storm cloud as I walked nervously through the room, their silent stares following my every step. The mayor offered a few shaky reassurances, then motioned for me to take the floor. "Good evening," I said, scanning the sea of anxious, pale faces. "I'm Officer Evelyn Harper. We don't have all the answers yet, but we are investigating this with everything we've got. Your safety is our priority. For the next 10 days, I urge everyone to stay indoors after dark, and if you see or hear anything strange, report it immediately, no exception." As I continued speaking and patiently answered their questions, my eyes continuously swept over the crowd. One woman in the second row particularly stood out. Her silver hair gleamed under the harsh lights, and her hands rested neatly on her lap. While the rest wore their fear openly, her expression was serene, calm to the point of detachment. When the meeting ended an hour later, I swiftly moved toward her. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said as the crowd began to thin. She turned to me, her blue eyes sharp and clear. "Hello, officer. I am Ruth. Nice to finally meet you," she said with a faint smile. "Ruth," I said, stepping closer, "would you like a ride home?" Her smile deepened just slightly. "That's very kind of you, Officer Harper. Yes, I'd appreciate that." Holbrook gave me a questioning glance, but I waved him off while Ruth and I walked toward the cruiser. As we drove to her residence, Ruth began to share snippets from her life. She was in her early 70s, born and raised in Ridgewater Creek. She'd never married, had no children, and retired only recently from her position as the local school librarian. When we arrived at her place, she invited me inside. Her home was warm and inviting, carrying the comforting scent of old wood and lavender. But what struck me most, however, was the massive bookshelf dominating her living room, stretching floor to ceiling and packed with books, some weathered, others pristine, all meticulously arranged. "You have quite the collection," I remarked, my eyes scanning the rows of books. "Books are windows to understanding, Officer Harper," she said with a wistful smile. "But they can also be windows to something darker, something forgotten." "You seemed unusually calm today at the town hall," I said carefully as I took a seat across from her. "Fear clouds one's judgment, my dear," she replied softly. "I've lived long enough to know that panic only leads to mistakes. The key is to look closely, Think clearly and see what others might overlook." Her words lingered, and I leaned forward. "So what are your thoughts on these deaths? What do you think is really going on here?" Ruth stood without replying, crossing to her bookshelf. Her fingers brushed over the spines before settling on a weathered, leather-bound volume. She opened it with care, flipping through the pages until she stopped at an illustration. The image was jarring. A figure lay on the ground, encircled by a crudely drawn ring with an undecipherable text scrawled near its feet. It was eerily similar to the crime scenes. My heart suddenly skipped a beat. This looks just like the crime scenes," I whispered. I leaned closer, studying the page. "What does the scrawl mean?" Her gaze met mine, calm but sharp enough to cut through silence. "It says Yurupari," she said evenly. "It means voice of fear. According to an old Amazonian legend, it's a being that devours the soul, but only after drowning the mind in terror." A cold knot formed in my gut. I stared at the illustration, unsure what unsettled me more, the image itself or how closely it mirrored what I'd seen in the field. Ruth flipped back a page, pointing to a figure cloaked in shadow, warped, faceless, more suggestion than shape. "This," she said softly, "is what the stories describe. It doesn't just kill, it lingers. It feeds on fear, smells it, tastes it, even enjoys it." Her voice dipped lower. "No one knows where it came from, but it's appeared before. Scattered sightings, unexplained deaths across the country. And 50 years ago, it came here, to Ridgewater Creek." I listened, both horrified and captivated, as her words sank in. "In the 70s, she continued, "this town was plagued by a series of unexplained deaths. No signs of struggle, no obvious causes. People were just dropping dead, and no one could figure out why. It went on for months, freezing the town in fear. The police were desperate for answers, but they found nothing." She paused, her face darkening with the weight of the memory. "That's when I found this book. As a librarian, I often sourced rare volumes, and when I saw this one, I had a feeling it might hold the answers we needed. I took it to the police chief, but he dismissed it immediately, called it nonsense." Her expression softened, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. "But there was one person who listened, a young sergeant named Henry Cross. He quietly observed while I tried to explain to the chief. He was the tenacious type, I must say, the kind of man who couldn't let something go until he understood it. He even came to my home, sat right where you're sitting now, and let me explain what I knew. A few days later, he came back and said he'd found a promising lead and that he was going somewhere to investigate." "And then?" I asked, eager to get to the bottom of it. She sighed deeply. "I never saw him again. He vanished without a trace. The murders stopped soon after, and the town returned to normal. But Henry, he was never seen or heard from again." "What do you think happened?" I asked, intrigued. Her expression grew inscrutable as she hesitated. "That, Officer Harper, is a question I've pondered for decades. Maybe you can connect the dots and let me know how this story ends." "Do you know where he went?" I finally asked after a moment's silence. She nodded. "He said he was going to the sawmill." Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I quickly answered, Holbrook's voice sharp with urgency. "Chief," he said, his tone grim, "we've got another one." "Where?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "The old sawmill," he replied. I quickly thanked Ruth and headed for the mill, long abandoned and feared by the local townsfolk. Perched on the edge of town, it had stood vacant for decades, its history making it a place that people usually believe to be haunted. The moment I stepped out of the cruiser, the air hit me, thick with rot and rusted iron, like the building itself was bleeding into the atmosphere. The sawmill loomed ahead, a decaying husk from the World War II era. Its roof sagged inward, windows shattered, vines curling through every crack. It looked half dead, but not empty. Something about it still breathed. To my right, a jeep had crashed into one side of the building, its front half crushed against the brickwork. Paramedics were extracting the driver's lifeless body, twisted and mangled beyond recognition. The passenger door hung open, offering a clear view inside the mill where another young man lay sprawled across the dusty floor. Unlike his friend, this one was alive. As I approached, I noticed one of the medics kneeling beside him, injecting something into his bloodstream to stabilize him. Moments later, the man startled awake, his body jerking as his eyes flew open, wide with terror. He scanned the scene wildly, his breath ragged and shallow until his gaze fixed on the wrecked jeep outside. Recognition dawned and his chest heaved as he tried to speak. "It's my friend," he gasped, his voice breaking. He just lost it. We were headed to the city, everything was fine. Then out of nowhere he panicked, started screaming like a madman, like he had seen something. He suddenly swerved off the road and drove straight into the building. I barely managed to jump out just before we hit the building. The medics eventually helped him to his feet and escorted him to the waiting ambulance. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to the mill's interior. My eyes were drawn instantly to a large, sealed fireplace at one end of the room. The mortar appeared weathered, but the bricks had been meticulously arranged, completely blocking the hearth. I stepped outside again, unable to shake the peculiar sight that kept nagging at me. From the outside, I could see that the jeep had rammed directly into the building's fireplace. I called for Sergeant Holbrook, and together we had the vehicle reversed. As the jeep was pulled back, the bricks began to crumble, revealing something hidden within. Behind the wall of debris was a skeletal figure, awkwardly slumped in the confines of the fireplace. Its bony hands tightly clutched a weathered brown book, its leather cover stained with a large patch of blood on the back, yet otherwise its overall condition remarkably intact. The tattered remnants of fabric clinging to the skeletal remains made the uniform hard to identify, but the government-issued firearm lying beside him left no doubt in my mind. I was looking at the mortal remains of Sergeant Cross. We spent the rest of the day combing through the mill, collecting the necessary samples for forensic testing, and then interrogating the survivor back at the hospital to get his full account of the events. By the time I was finished, it was already 11:30. As I was heading out for home, I noticed the sergeant's journal lying in the evidence tray, tagged and ready for testing. Without thinking, I grabbed it and made my way home, planning to take a long bath before finally getting some rest. I stepped into the bathroom, filled the tub, and slowly eased into the warm water. Muscles aching, mind racing, I reached for Sergeant Cross's journal. The cover was worn, the pages dense with someone else's obsession. I leaned back, opened it, and began to read. People like to say the badge stands for serve and protect, but for me, it was always about Ricky and what he stood for. He's the reason I wear this uniform, the reason I still walk the beat, keeping watch for the bully hiding in the dark. Growing up in foster care, I didn't have much more than the shirt on my back and 100 reasons to keep my head down. The other kids were bigger, meaner, and twice as cruel. Every day felt like a battle, and every night I prayed I wouldn't wake up with a black eye, or worse. Then came Ricky. He wasn't some guardian angel swooping in to save me. Nah, he was just another kid dumped into the system, rough around the edges like the rest of us. But Ricky didn't believe in running or hiding. Punch first and think later, he always used to say, and he lived by it. He taught me how to stand tall, to fight back, not just with fists, but with grit, persistence, and anything else that gave us an edge. A poke in the eye, a kick in the nuts, smashing a bottle over someone's head while they were busy eating. It didn't matter. The rules were simple. Keep going, again and again, until they start to feel it in their bones. I'll never forget the one time we fought back. 3 bigger kids had us cornered behind the schoolyard. They were huge, grinning like wolves, and ready to pounce. Ricky didn't hesitate. He threw the first punch, and I followed right behind him. We didn't win, not even close. By the end of it, we were in the hospital with more broken bones than I could count. My ribs ached for weeks, and every breath felt like fire. But what I remember most isn't the pain. It's lying there in that hospital bed, tears streaming down my face, feeling something I'd never felt before, a sense of victory. We may not have won the fight, but we held our heads high. And when we got finally back, we tormented them for weeks until we made damn sure they never picked on us again. Ricky was the only real friend I ever had, the only one that mattered, at least. So when I found him dead at a crime scene, his soul ripped from him, leaving only fear etched on his face, it felt like something inside me had been ripped away too. This wasn't just murder, it was personal. That was the moment I knew I'd stop at nothing to find whatever did this. Ricky deserved that much. This journal. It's the only way I know to keep my mind clear, to hold on to something real. These are my thoughts, my rage, my resolve, and it's time to bully the bully. I hadn't been near the old sawmill since I was a teenager, back when a few of us dared each other to sneak in after dark. We all knew the stories. They said the workers showed up one morning to find the owner in pieces, his legs severed by the saw table, and the rest of him roasting in the fireplace. The mill never reopened, and its sinister reputation only deepened with time. Whispers of ghost sightings and unexplained phenomena grew so pervasive that authorities eventually sealed the fireplace to deter thrill-seekers and other oddballs from exploiting the site. Now, here I was again, on a stakeout, sitting in my car, hidden among a row of trees, with the decaying structure looming in the distance. My mind immediately wandered to the events of the past couple of months. Ridgewater Creek had seen more than 25 deaths, including that of my friend, and we were no closer to solving the case. The air in town was thick with fear. People were irritable, on edge, constantly glancing over their shoulders. Chaos was unraveling right before my eyes, and the community was fraying at the seams. The chief was convinced we were dealing with a serial killer. At first, I didn't argue. The objects found at each scene, a dented ashtray, a felt hat, a tennis racket, a wristwatch, a cassette tape, a flashlight, felt deliberate. Like someone was leaving behind a twisted signature. But the deeper I looked, the more it fell apart. The items didn't connect to the people who died. No common thread, no message, just randomness. Like they weren't chosen by a killer at all, but by something that didn't think like us. As the body count climbed, so did my doubts. Something about it didn't sit right. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when a young woman walked into the station, clutching a theory about a supernatural entity tied to an old legend she'd uncovered in a dusty book. The chief dismissed her as a crank, but desperation has a way of shifting priorities. I couldn't afford to ignore any lead, no matter how improbable. That evening, I met her at her home. As she laid out her theory, a strange sense of clarity took hold, and it got me thinking. If the entity she called Yurupari was real, it would need a place to hide, somewhere near town, but remote enough to remain undisturbed. The place had to be abandoned, forgotten by time, where no one would think to look, and only one such place came to mind. So when I returned to the sawmill after all these years, I found it in even worse shape than I'd imagined, its wooden frame sagging, the air thick with the stench of rot and mildew. I scoured every corner, but there was nothing unusual. No signs of anything lurking, no evidence to support Ruth's theory. I was even ready to write it off as a dead end and leave when something caught my eye. In a shadowed corner of the mill, half buried beneath dust and debris, I spotted something strange, an odd little cluster of items, an American flag keychain, a leather wallet, a razor, and a bottle opener. At first glance, they looked like junk, but they weren't aged or rusted. They were clean, too clean for this place. Like they'd been left recently, deliberately. That's when it hit me. Something had been here. Not just passing through, staying, watching, collecting. I couldn't turn away now, not until I understood what I was really dealing with. I headed back to the mill right after my shift. Sat in my car all night, watching, waiting. Tried to stay alert, but sometime near dawn, exhaustion won. I jolted awake. Sure, I'd seen a flash of light. My heart jumped. I rushed inside. Nothing. Just the same rotting wood and silence. The mill hadn't changed, or so it wanted me to think. I barely made it through the station doors before the news hit. Another death. This time an older man, found collapsed in his garden, eyes wide, mouth frozen in terror. But it wasn't the expression that chilled me, it was what they found lying next to him. A leather wallet, the exact one I'd seen 2 nights earlier at the mill. When I rushed back to the mill, I found the wallet and keychain missing while the razor and bottle opener still remained by the side. An uneasy sensation coursed through my veins as I stared at the objects scattered on the floor. Gripping a stick, I cautiously nudged them apart before hesitantly hovering my little finger over the razor. Taking a deep breath, I let the tip of my little finger make contact. A strange warmth crept into my hand, followed by a flood of sensation. Suddenly, I was back in my childhood. My mother's laughter, her arms catching me mid-air, her kiss brushing my cheek. Almost involuntarily, I touched the razor again, This time with my ring finger. The memory shifted. A birthday cake. My parents' faces glowing in the candlelight. Joy. Innocence. But beneath it all, something else. Something waiting. Sweat trickled down my chin as I began lifting my fingers one by one, preparing to grasp the razor fully. But the moment my hand closed around it, a long-buried memory surged to the surface. A fateful night I had forced into the deepest recesses of my mind, one that irrevocably and painfully altered the course of my life. Gasping, I tore my hand away just in time, the force of the memory knocking me backward. My chest tightened as I lay sprawled on the floor, staring at the razor, now innocuously lying among the debris. Then it hit me, a thick metallic tang in the air, sharp and unmistakable, like rusted iron. The atmosphere in the mill shifted entirely, growing heavier and oppressive. Then from the direction of the sealed fireplace, a low rumble echoed. I crept closer, my movements slow and deliberate, as I leaned against the cold concrete straining to listen, and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end when I heard it, something faint but unmistakable. It was cackling, low and stifled, as though someone or something was struggling to suppress its glee. I took a careful step back, my eyes scanning the mill's interior. The fireplace led to a chimney wide enough for a person to fit through, but there was no visible point of entry from the inside. Stepping outside, I began a slow walk around the perimeter, inspecting every inch for an access point. Then I saw it. A section of the roof near the chimney in complete disrepair, with several missing tiles. It dawned on me that whatever was using the mill could easily climb up the chimney, slip onto the roof, and through the gaps re-enter the building without being seen. I now had a decision to make here. My first impulse was to climb to the roof, toss a grenade or two down the chimney, or at the very least empty my revolver into whatever was lurking below. But I hesitated. Now that I understood how the deaths were happening, my thoughts went straight back to the razor I'd touched. If these killings were tied to objects, things that could tap into buried trauma and pull it to the surface, then brute force wasn't going to solve anything. This wasn't a physical threat, it was something older, something that played by its own rules. And if this entity operated beyond the physical world, traditional weapons wouldn't make a difference. So I made a decision. I would stay one more night at the mill. But this time, I'd go inside. I found a hiding spot behind a heavy old table in the hallway, solid enough to shield me, with just the right angle to watch both the fireplace and the broken stretch of roof above it. 10 hours passed. Maybe more. The moonlight slipped in through cracks overhead, carving long shadows across the floor. My body was sore, stiff from staying still. But I didn't move. Every nerve in my body was waiting, listening. Then, a flash, quick, silent, blinding. Something had arrived. At first, it was just a fleeting glimmer. As my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A sliver of light the size of a coin, hovering mid-air at the center of the mill, as if conjured from nothing. Then I noticed movement. A head, barely discernible against the gloom, peeking through a hole in the roof. It moved down the wall with the unsettling precision of a lizard, its dark form easily blending into the shadows. It landed without a sound and slowly rose, no taller than 5 feet. A heavy robe cloaked its form, hiding even its face. Its back was to me as one bony grey arm lifted toward the orb of light now floating mid-air. The orb pulsed, then slid into its hand like a drop of mercury. My breath hitched as a mouth split open across its palm, followed by 2 blinking eyes. The hand turned to face the creature and watched itself. Then the robe dropped. What stood beneath wasn't human. Eyes blinked where no eyes should be. Mouths opened and closed in slow, gurgling rhythms. Some smiling, some chewing, some just staring. I pressed deeper into my hiding spot, every muscle tensed. This wasn't a creature, it was a collection of faces pretending to be one. When the creature turned, its front revealed an even more unsettling sight. A face riddled with mismatched eyes and mouths, all opening and closing in unnerving disarray. Every movement of its twisted features sent waves of dread through me, yet I couldn't tear my gaze away. Bathed in the faint moonlight filtering through the broken roof, the creature seemed mesmerized by its own horrific, ever-changing form. The creature's gaze shifted next to its feet and the one remaining hand, the only parts of its body still devoid of eyes or mouths. Then, with unsettling purpose, it turned toward a cluster of objects lying in the corner of the mill. Draping its robe back over its twisted frame, it bent down, scooped up the razor and bottle opener, and quietly slipped out of the mill. As the silence returned, a cold dread settled in my chest, and I felt a sickening certainty. Somewhere in Ridgewater Creek, another death had just occurred. I cautiously emerged from my hiding spot and began tailing the creature from a safe distance. It was now moving towards the highway, keeping itself concealed within the shadows of a row of trees skirting the forest's edge. The creature walked for another mile before pulling up its hood and stepping into a quiet parking lot near a diner. It casually discarded a couple of objects, the razor into the bed of an empty pickup truck and the bottle opener onto the seat of a nearby car. Moving through the rows of vehicles, it carefully peered into each one, its movements deliberate and methodical. Finally, it reached an open car window from which it retrieved a Zippo lighter and a small transistor radio from another. With these items shoved into its pocket, the creature turned and began its journey back toward the mill. Staying out of sight, I crept over to the vehicles. Using a kerchief to avoid direct contact, I retrieved the razor and opener the creature had discarded, hiding them near a tree line for safekeeping. Then, I resumed following the creature as it made its way back to the mill, my heart pounding with every step. When I reached the mill, I crept toward a cracked window and peered inside. The creature stood in the center of the room, holding the transistor in one hand, while the other hovered above it. A low, guttural sound rumbled from its many mouths as its eyes blinked erratically in a chaotic rhythm. I watched as the creature raised its upper hand, revealing the transistor encased in a shimmering bubble. Inside, tendrils of green liquid spiraled downward like a miniature tornado before merging with the object. The transistor began to glow with a deep crimson hue, pulsing ominously. Without warning, the bubble popped with a faint hiss, and the creature released the transistor, letting it fall to the ground beside the Zippo. It then turned away, scaling the wall in complete silence, slipping back down the chimney to once again rest by the fireplace. I got back in my car and drove straight to my chief's home to appraise him of what I had discovered. For the first time since the whole ordeal began, we now had the upper hand and were in a position to devise a plan of attack. As I pulled up at his driveway, my stomach sank. Pete, our youngest cop, stood frozen in front of the chief's cruiser, its door hanging wide open. His expression said it all. Inside the cruiser, the chief sat slumped in the driver's seat, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, frozen in that same hollow stare I'd seen too many times before, and there it was, the little American flag keychain swinging gently from the ignition. Somehow, it had made its way to him. Pete, the youngest on the force, barely 20, stood just outside the door, staring like his brain couldn't process what he was seeing. After a long, silent moment, he reached up, unpinned his badge, and placed it gently on the hood. Then he walked away. No goodbyes, no words, just the quiet sound of footsteps fading down the street, and just like that, I was the last cop left in Ridgewater Creek. Alone now, I shifted into survival mode. No more waiting, no more backup. I had to finish this, and I had to do it on my own terms. But before returning to the mill, I made one last stop. Ruth. I needed answers. Anything she hadn't told me yet. Anything that might give me an edge against whatever this thing really was. But it soon became clear that I knew more than she did, and there wasn't much else she could offer. Something about the visit also unsettled me, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why, so I kept my findings vague and made my exit. By the time I reached the mill, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, with probably just an hour of sunlight left. Since the creature loved objects, I brought one of my own and placed it in the center of the mill, right where it had stood the previous night. I also brought a ladder, setting it up out back to give myself access to the roof if needed. Armed and ready, I took cover and waited for darkness to set in. An hour past midnight, I quietly slipped out of the mill and made my way to the tree line where I had hidden the discarded objects. Careful not to touch them directly, I gathered them and returned to the mill, tossing them onto the floor with the others before retreating to my hiding spot. Seconds later, I heard the sound of something scrambling up the chimney and landing on the roof. Through a gap in the ceiling, I finally caught a clear glimpse of the creature beneath the pale light of the full moon. Its grotesque, twisted face peered inside with an almost childlike curiosity. As I had anticipated, it sensed the return of the cursed objects, but its attention quickly shifted to the veiled item at the center of the room. Its eyes darted around, scanning for any sign of intruders before it began a slow, deliberate descent down the wall. Once it reached the floor, it carefully pulled away the veil to reveal a life-sized mirror. The creature paused, glancing around one last time, then let its robe fall to the floor. Transfixed, it stood before the mirror, completely absorbed by the reflection staring back at it. In fact, the creature was so mesmerized that it failed to notice a flash grenade roll past its leg, and before it could react, a blinding burst of light erupted, filling the room with a searing flash and a deafening crack. The creature staggered back, shielding its eyes before letting out an ear-splitting shriek when it saw its leg locked in a bear trap. I emerged from hiding, watching as it desperately tried to pry open the metal jaws in frantic frustration. I aimed my firearm at its head, and the eye closest to the muzzle ballooned in size, locking onto mine with unnerving intensity. Before it could react, I fired at point-blank range. The bullet tore through the eye, sending its head jerking back, but it immediately snapped upright again. I watched in disgust as one of its mouths contorted at a bizarre angle, as though reaching for the bullet lodged just beyond its grasp. It began to gnaw and chew, and then, with a tilt of its head, another mouth expelled the spent bullet from the back of its skull. Then, without warning, its hand suddenly stretched unnaturally, growing to twice its size as it seized my arm and sent me crashing into the mirror. The force of the impact sent me sprawling to the floor. Even with the bear trap still clamped around its leg, the creature loomed over me, its face contorting into a gleeful, twisted grin. The creature's grip tightened around my arm, its claws digging into my wrist. With a sharp twist, my wrist snapped, and I saw the gun fall from my hand, clattering out of reach onto the floor. I reached for the knife in my pocket and lunged, but it caught my wrist mid-air, cold, inhumanly strong. It didn't disarm me, it guided me. Slowly, precisely, it twisted the blade until the tip faced my chest. Then it placed its own hand over mine, and pushed. Inch by inch, the knife descended. I strained, gritted my teeth, but it kept going, its many eyes locked on mine, mouths stretching into silent grins. Tears blurred my vision as I fought to endure the agonizing pain from my broken wrist, the knife edging dangerously close to my chest. Straining with every ounce of strength, I made a final, desperate attempt to shift the blade with my other arm. The knife scraped painfully across my skin, blood spurting from the wound. But then, something strange happened. The blood splashed across the creature's face, and it seemed to scorch its skin. Its eyes bulged and then popped, releasing a sickening pus, and it let out a shriek of torment. With renewed resolve, I straightened my arm like Spider-Man, causing blood to erupt from my forearm in frantic spurts, splashing all across the creature's face. Its skin began to swell and bubble, boils bursting open as pus leaked out from multiple pores, releasing a stench so foul it made my head spin and my stomach churn in revolt. For the first time, I felt its grip falter as it recoiled, desperately trying to avoid the blood. Seizing the moment, I slashed my other arm across the blade, and blood now poured from both forearms in frantic jets, splattering across the creature's chest like a grotesque fountain. My own shirt became drenched in blood as I continued to struggle against its grip. Then, something happened that made me freeze, my mouth falling open in shock. The creature's eyes and mouths began to align on either side of its body from head to toe, jostling and shifting to create an empty space right down the middle. Suddenly, its skin split open, starting at the center of its forehead and tearing downward, exposing a dark, gaseous, formless entity that pulsed with an ominous energy. It felt as though the entity was being forcibly drawn toward me, as if being sucked right into my chest. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst. The creature convulsed, its body fighting against the force with every fiber of its being. It finally released its grip on my arms, jerking itself backward to escape the pull. In its desperation, it spun violently, the trapped leg twisting grotesquely in the bear trap before snapping free with a sickening crack. The severed limb remained behind as the creature collapsed onto the nearby floor. For a moment, it didn't move, just lay there, twitching in the blood and ash. Then, with a guttural hiss, it dragged itself upright, limping, shaking, its many eyes locked onto me, rage burning in some, fear flickering in others. And then it turned. It scrambled up the wall with unnatural speed and vanished through the broken roof, retreating into the night. I sat up slowly, clutching my chest, breath ragged and shallow. My heart felt like it might burst, but then I felt something solid beneath my hand. The journal. I pulled it from my pocket. The back cover was soaked through. My blood had seeped deep into the binding, the pages warped and stained dark red. That's when it hit me. The creature had come this close to being trapped. I'm still here, still inside the mill. I can't leave. Not yet. Not while there's a chance this thing could come back. Or worse, escape for good. I've patched myself up the best I can. The bleeding's slowed, but I've lost a lot. Staying focused is getting harder. Every second feels heavier than the last. But I've made up my mind. I'm going up to the roof. One last time. If this thing wants to finish it, so do I. The objects scattered on the floor. I've destroyed them. Rolled them in the blood I spilled. Doused them in gasoline and set them ablaze. I swear I could hear that thing squirming inside the fireplace as the flames rose. I thought about throwing the severed limb into the fire too, for good measure, but it's already melted into some kind of disgusting goo and stuck to the floor like tar. So this is going to be my final update. Hopefully there won't be a need for another. To my friend Ricky, wherever you are, see you when I see you. This is Sergeant Henry Cross, signing off, over and out. I closed the journal and sank back into the tub, my hands trembling. Not just from what I'd read, but from what the journal had become. That's when I saw it. The dark stain on the back cover, my blood was fading, shrinking, like the paper was drinking it in. Then the ink came back, fresh, wet, alive. The journal had started writing again. With my heart hammering in my chest, I slowly reopened the journal. To my utter disbelief, new words began to form on the aged paper, flowing as if written by an unseen hand. They picked up exactly where Cross had left off, but this time, the ink was unmistakably his own blood. I don't remember exactly how I fell down the chimney, just the sharp crack of my neck as the creature and I tumbled down toward the fireplace below. When I opened my eyes, everything was white. The creature was gone, but its presence lingered, faint yet heavy, like a low, constant thrum in the air. It didn't take long to understand. I was trapped, inside my own journal no less. The creature was still here, somewhere in this endless blankness. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it everywhere, like a shadow clinging to my back. Strangely, it didn't bother me much. At times, I even wondered if it felt my presence too in the same way. Time didn't exist here, or if it did, it was meaningless. Moments bled together, days or years, perhaps even decades, dissolving into a formless void. When I closed my eyes, memories would surge forth in vivid detail, replaying the life I once lived. Sometimes I thought about escaping, just for a moment, and each time the weight returned, crushing, like the world itself pressing down to erase the thought. So I stopped hoping, I stopped fighting. Instead, I wandered the memories, the good, the bad, anything to forget where I really was. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, could the creature also somehow sense this struggle within? Then there was this one time I thought of Ruth, where she might be, what had become of her, and whether she was still alive. And then shortly after, she appeared at the mill. Did she intuitively heed to my calling? I couldn't say for sure. Her hair was grey, her frame frail, but I recognized her instantly. Decades had passed, yet her eyes were as sharp as ever. But what brought her back here? I watched as she searched the mill, deliberate and focused. To my shock, she began uncovering more cursed objects, things I'd never known the creature had kept safely hidden. She handled them as if she'd knew exactly what they were. I realized immediately I was right to be suspicious of her all along. In that moment, I felt the weight on my shoulders grow heavier. Since then, it hasn't stopped. Each death in town brings a new burden. That's when it hit me. This was Ruth's doing. She was the one placing the objects, quietly delivering them to unsuspecting people, and letting the entity do the rest. And I felt their death whenever it happened. I can see their faces, their fear, their suffering, even though I have never known or met any of them. But what haunts me the most is the growing realization that buried deep within my consciousness, somewhere, I am beginning to find an odd satisfaction in watching it all unfold. Which brings me to your situation, Officer Harper. Yes, I could read your nameplate when you came to inspect my remains. I don't think I can hold out much longer, so get ready, the ride is about to get bumpy. As I finished reading Sergeant Cross's journal, I noticed a blotch of red ink begin to form at the final word. It slowly seeped down the page before dripping into the water of my bathtub. More streaks followed, trailing steadily, the crimson dye bleeding across the paper. My heart raced as I sat up, clutching the book, unsure what to make of it. Suddenly, the ink exploded, splattering across my face as the pages began to rip apart on their own. The journal wrenched itself from my grip and plunged into the water. An invisible force pressed down on me instantly, jerking my body backward and pulling me under. Desperate, I summoned every ounce of strength, pushing against the suffocating weight to break the surface. As I came up gasping for air, a chilling image flooded my mind, a 7-year-old girl pounding frantically on the inside of an old broom closet. Through a narrow slit in the door, her small hand reached out trembling, while outside her stepmother stared with cold indifference. The sight paralyzed me. Claustrophobia gripped my chest like a vice, freezing me in place. In that instant, the unseen force dragged me back underwater, swallowing me whole. I thrashed wildly, refusing to surrender, forcing myself once again to the surface, but this time, when I broke free, I was met with the same horrific scene, only now, I stood inches from the closet door, my face slammed against the wood, as if shoved by an unseen hand. Inside the cramped, dark space, lifeless faces stared back at me, people from the cases I'd worked. Their hollow, accusing eyes bored into me, their silent presence pressing in from all sides. The air reeked of death, thick, rancid, unescapable. Panic surged through my chest, but before I could move, the force seized me again and yanked me deeper into the dark. Submerged once more, my will to fight dissolved. The icy water enveloped me, offering an odd sort of comfort. A voice echoed in my mind, soft yet insidious. "You're fine now, at peace. This will soon end. Don't fight it, Evelyn." A strange calm settled over me, and I began to relent. The water filled my lungs, the pain dulling as an unnatural serenity took its place. I prepared for the end, but just as the quiet began to overtake me, a sudden jolt brought me back. A hand plunged into the water, seizing me by the hair and yanking me back to the surface. "Oh no, you're not getting away that easy," a voice snarled, sharp and commanding. "You're going to fight this out. Come on, officer, fight!" I couldn't tell if my mind was playing tricks on me, but in that moment, my eyes locked onto a young man with dark, slicked-back hair and a thick moustache. His expression was unwavering, his gaze filled with pure determination. "You're not done yet," he said, his voice gruff and commanding, like an anchor pulling me back from the brink. His grip on my hair was unrelenting, his strength almost otherworldly. "Fight! Fight for your life!" And then, like snapping awake mid-nightmare, I was back in the broom closet. The stench hit me first, thick and rotting, curling into my lungs. The faces were everywhere now, the dead from my cases, crowding the darkness, their lifeless eyes locked onto mine. Their silence was louder than any scream, pressing down on me, suffocating. The walls felt tighter, closer, squeezing the breath from my chest as panic clawed its way to the surface. But that voice, the man's voice, cut through the suffocating fear like a lifeline. "Fight!" he commanded, his tone sharp and impatient. His grip on me tightened as though he could physically wrench me free from the nightmares clawing at my mind. Summoning every ounce of willpower I had left, I fought back. My limbs flailed wildly, kicking and thrashing against the oppressive darkness. With a sudden crack, the walls of the closet split open and a sliver of light pierced through. A flicker of hope surged within me. Fueled by desperation, I hurled my body forward, ramming through the opening. I burst free, breaking the surface of the water, my body slamming against the side of the tub before spilling onto the floor, gasping and choking for air. As my breath came in ragged bursts, an ominous, shapeless figure loomed above, its piercing gaze cutting through the suffocating stillness. My arms were heavy, my body soaked and shaking, but instinct kicked in. I lurched upright and slammed my elbow into the mirror. It shattered with a burst of sharp cracks. I grabbed a shard, slicing my hand open, blood trailing down my arm. "Stay back!" I yelled, holding the jagged edge between us. The thing didn't move. It just hovered, watching. Then, like a shadow slipping between seconds, it vanished through the window, gone without a sound. I dropped the glass shard. It hit the floor and spun once before falling still. I sat there for a long time, soaked, bleeding, half-conscious, staring at the window where that thing had vanished. The room was silent again, except for my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I don't know how long I sat like that. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Eventually I pulled myself to my feet, stepped over the shattered glass, and dried off with the closest towel I could find. I didn't even bandage my hand. I kept looking at the journal on the floor. It hadn't moved. No more blood, no more writing. Just a book again, quiet. But I know better. The creature's out. It's not going back to the mill. The rules have changed. And Ruth, I don't know what her role in this really is. But she knew more than she said, and now she needs to hear everything. I'm going to her place first thing in the morning, not as a cop, just as someone who wants the truth. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.